computer. Okay, so Jai Bhim to all of you, and we are meeting after some time, after almost a break of 2 weeks, and we are going through the book 2 and part 3 of the Buddha and his Dhamma, and we have finished half of this part 3. It's rather very interesting part, but before we go on, we will just chant our traditional Pali text. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So we have seen that after his enlightenment, the Buddha went on with a campaign to convert the people, and the aim of this particular part 3 is to demonstrate as to how the Buddha tried to convert people from all walks of life, and that is the intention of the section, that the Buddhism is not, the Buddha's teaching was not just limited to one particular section of the community, but it spread out all over all the sections of the community. And in this connection, we have seen that the Buddha converted the Jatilas, the fire worshippers like the Uruvela Kashyap, Nadi Kashyap, and Gaya Kashyap, and so on. So today we are going to look at how the Buddha converted King Bimbisar. And anyone who has visited the Rajgir area would be astonished by the remains of Buddha's times there. And it was Rajgir was the capital of Bimbisar, and we know the story of his son Ajatashatru, and Buddha also converted Ajatashatru. But here goes the story of Bimbisar, and we have seen in the early part of the Buddha and his Dhamma that the Buddha has also met Bimbisar before his enlightenment. So we can see that this is the meeting of the Buddha with Bimbisar after his enlightenment. And before his enlightenment also, the Buddha had a meeting with Bimbisar, and we have seen how Bimbisar tried to convert the young Siddhartha Gautam to the life of materialism. He offered him share in his kingdom. He offered him material welfare. He also tried to convince him that for the young man like him, he shouldn't renounce the house and he should stick back to the worldly duties, and so on and so forth. And again, Bimbisar is meeting the Buddha. But the context of this meeting is very interesting, because as we have seen that the Kashyaps, the fire worshippers, the three brothers, were so popular in the city of Banaras that when people came to know about their conversion to Buddhism, it was like a news which caught the imaginations of the people, including the king himself, the King Bimbisar. And then Bimbisar, when he came to know that the Buddha is in the city, and he came to know of the Buddha's arrival in the city, Bimbisar, with a large retinue of the people, he went to the Buddha. And the large retinue, actually the number is given here. It's a big number, like it's like a whole city has gone to meet the Buddha. And 12 Myrites of Magadha Brahmins and householders saw Uruvela Kashyap. Means he went with a large number of people, as if he was going to meet the Buddha with a big crowd. Such was the fancy of Bimbisar and the people in Rajgir. And people were confused, because people were confused about who is following whom, whether the Buddha is following the Kashyapas or the Kashyapas are following the Buddha. People were confused. And when they went to see the Buddha, this is a very beautiful description. Whenever people go to meet the Buddha, what happens? So let me read this. And of those 12 Myrites of Magadha Brahmins and householders, some also respectfully saluted the Blessed One and sat down near him. Some exchanged greetings with the Blessed One, and having done so, they sat down near him with complaisant words. Some bent their clasped hands towards the Blessed One and sat down near him. Some made known their name and family name before the Blessed One and sat down near him. Some sat down near him silent. You see, there the responses of the people captured in this paragraph as to when the people go to meet the Buddha. A lot of people have, the various people have various ways of paying their respect, their salutation to the Buddha. And we have seen, the way the 12 Mayarites of Magadha, people from Magadha, the way they responded to the Buddha. Some of them just saluted with their hands. Some of them bent before the Buddha. Some of them just, nodded their head. Some of them, just told their names and their village names, and so on and so forth. So the thought arose in the minds of the people, and the thought goes like this: how now is this? Does the great Samana follow the holy life under Uruvela Kashyap, or does Uruvela Kashyap follow the holy life under the great Samana? So the Blessed One understood it. Having understood this, addressed the Venerable Uruvela Kashyapa. So now there are a lot of people in the audience, and the Buddha is asking a question to Uruvela Kashyap. So, the question goes like this, and I think this is a very interesting question. The question goes like this: what has thou seen, O dweller of Uruvela? Because he was a Uruvela Kashyap. That thou who art called the Great One has forsaken the fire worship. How is it thou has forsaken fire worship? So there are the two questions that the Buddha asked to Uruvela Kashyap as to what has he seen, and what is it so great that he has forsaken the fire worship, because he was very famous for his fire worship. The Kashyapa replied, it is sounds, it sights and sounds and also taste and women of sense desire that the sacrifices promise. It was because I understood that these things are impure that I took no more delight in sacrifices and offering, because the sacrifices and the fire worship, according to them, it offered them what is called the object of sensuality. Okay, now this paragraph has to be unpacked and understood in the right manner. When the Buddha talked about the sensual objects, it is not just about the sensual object in terms of what we see through our eyes, what we hear through our ears, what we smell through our nose, what we taste through our tongue, what we feel through our touch, and so on and so forth. And this there is a beautiful sutra that we have seen in the Pali classes about how the mind of the women takes on to the words, the smell, the form of the man, and how the mind of the man takes on after the words, the sound, the taste, the form of the women. So it's like it has to be read like this, that the impurities of sensual objects. So according to Uruvela Kashyap, he has realized the futility of following these sensual desires, in a sense that they are impure, and he has seen deeply the nature of the objects of the senses. So initially, through fire worship and through the sacrifices, the fire worshippers were taught that they would be able to achieve what is called the best of the sensual pleasures. But after the Buddha explained the Kashyaps and his followers that there is no delight in the sensual objects, because the sensual objects by their very nature are impure. And I think that's a very interesting comment by the fire worshipper. So he's also trying to tell about his philosophy of why they worship the fires to get the material gains, and they stopped worshipping the fire because they came to know that the material gains, based on the sensual objects, are impure in nature. And I think that's very interesting, sort of a brief summary of what went on between the Buddha and Uruvela Kashyap. But if you don't mind, tell us what made you think so. Then the Venerable Uruvela Kashyap rose from his seat Now, this is very significant. Uruvela Kashyap was supposed to be a very powerful man of his time. So what happens? Then the Venerable Uruvela Kashyap rose from his seat, adjusted his upper robe so as to cover one shoulder. He covered his one shoulder and one shoulder was exposed, prostrated himself, inclining his head to the feet of the Buddha, the Blessed One, and said to the Blessed One, "My teacher is the Blessed One." So he made a public announcement of being the follower of the Buddha. He said, "My teacher is the Blessed One. I am his pupil." Then those 12 Myrites of Magadha Brahmins and householders understood Uruvela Kashyap follows the holy life under the great Samana, the Mahasamana, the Buddha himself. Okay, so now what has happened is Baba Sahib Ambedkar has given the gist of what conversation has taken place between the Uruvela Kashyap and the Gaya Kashyap, and ultimately the Uruvela Kashyap and the Buddha. And ultimately Uruvela Kashyap has told to the large audience of the people from Magadha that he is the follower of the Buddha, and he has become follower of the Buddha because he has understood the futility of the fire sacrifices and the futility of the fire worship. And why so? Because the Buddha has taught him and he has demonstrated him the impurity of the essential objects. And because the essential objects by their very nature are impure, there is no point in following, in pursuing the essential objects. So that is the gist of what has happened there. So after seeing Uruvela Kashyap and his brothers had taken refuge in the Buddha, we have seen they were 1,000 in number. And when they took the refuge in the Buddha, they accepted the Buddha as their leader, accepted the Buddha as their teacher. Then having seen this, the Seniya Bimbisar, having witnessed the scene, having understood the Dhamma, having dispelled all doubts, having gained full knowledge, said to the Blessed One, "In former days, Lord, when I was a prince, I entertained 5 aspirations. These are now fulfilled." So when King Bimbisara was a prince, he had these 5 aspirations, and one of his aspirations was to encounter the Buddha and listen the Dhamma from him, and now that was fulfilled. So his 5 aspirations were fulfilled. So you see, it's very interesting. This means that even before the advent of the Buddha, there was kind of the word Buddha himself might be there in the society, because Bimbisara, when he was young, there was no Buddha. There, Siddhartha Gautama was growing up. So I think we have to see that the word for awakening, the Buddha, must be the part of the society, or we can say that it must be the part of the general philosophical trend of the society. So now, having Bimbisara going for refuge, taking Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha as his guide in his life, we see that it has an immense impact on the people. And we know that a lot of people, Buddha, King Bimbisara came up with a lot of revenue, a lot of retinue with him. And many of the people who came with him to see the Buddha, to witness that scene of Uruvela Kashyap and the Buddha, most of them, they accepted the Buddha as their teacher. And I think, this verse number 15, I think I have to read it because it's so beautiful. Wonderful Lord, wonderful, just as if one should set up what has been overturned. Because for us in the life, a lot of things are overturned. And because the things are overturned, we need to turn them upside down. They are upside down. We have to we have to turn them in the right ways. So you see the use of the words, the metaphors, in this particular verse number 15. Wonderful Lord, wonderful, just as if one should set up what had been overturned, or should reveal what has been hidden. The reality might be hidden in the plain sight, but we are not able to see it. The reality is unfolding before us all the time. We don't need to be taught that the world is impermanent. Everything is changing in front of our eyes, that we don't have to be taught about death, because we all witness death all the time, everywhere, of our beloved ones, of our near and dear ones. But what happens is that, we need sometimes to remove that blindings on our eyesight, the blindings on our vision, and really see what is out there. So, that is what the Buddha does. He reveals what is hidden. And, look at this beautiful sentence: or should reveal what has been hidden, or should point out the way to one who had lost his way, or should bring a lamp into the darkness. This image of bringing a lamp into the darkness is very vivid image. And it shows as to the power of the insights or knowledge, as to when the light arises, the darkness dispels. And I think that's very interesting. Sort of these are, and these words sounds very beautiful in Pali. If we read the text in Pali, maybe next time we will try to recite in Pali. The way the Buddha's teachings had an impact on the audience. It's so beautifully captured here. In order that those who had eyes might see things. Thus has the Blessed One preached the Dhamma in many ways. I take refuge, Lord, in that Blessed One, and in the Dhamma, and in the fraternity of bhikkhus, monks. May the Blessed One receive me from this day forth while my life lasts, as a lay disciple who has taken refuge in him. You see, so the king Bimbisara also took refuge in the Buddha. And it's very interesting that along with king, the millions of the people, or the multitude of the people came to see the Buddha with him, also became the followers of the Buddha. So that is a power when people from the higher positions, when the people from powerful positions, when they go for refuge to the Buddha, the lot of people follow their king or their leader. So this is very interesting as to how Baba Saheb Ambedkar has begun this part 3 with the conversion of the high and highly. And now we see the very interesting character in the Buddhist text and in the Buddhist history is Anathapindaka. Anathapindaka is a very interesting character, and we know the stories of how he was devoted to the Buddha, and we are going to see his stories, filling the pages of the Buddhist scriptures. And he is somebody who is very ideal person, and he is about whom it is said that he was completely devoted to the Buddha, and he even attained to the fruits of enlightenment by remaining what is called the lay person. And here in this paragraph, it's very clear that there is not much a difference between the lay person and the bhikkhu. And I think this is very indicative of this part too, that you see Bimbisar, the converts we saw before, Bimbisar, they were mostly coming from the philosophical background. They were already parivrajaks. But now we have seen the conversion of King Bimbisara. He remained a king, being the follower of the Buddha. And now comes Anathapindaka, one of the richest person. Let me introduce you Anathapindaka, the great disciple of the Buddha. His name was Sudatta, and he was a resident of Shravasti. Shravasti was a very massive city at the time, the capital of the kingdom of Kosala. It was ruled by King Pasennajit. In our Indic languages today, Pasennajit. Sudatta was a treasurer of the king. Now imagine a treasurer of the king. Sudatta was a filthy, rich man. From his bounties to the poor, Sudatta was known as Anathapindaka. But this Sudatta has got a very kind heart, very benevolent heart. So he was known for his, donations to the people. He was giving large donations to the people, and mostly to the poor. Anath. Okay, Pinda means giving. He was giving to the people who were, orphans and so on and so forth. And that is how he was called Anathapindaka. But his name was Sudatta. Maybe his official name was Sudatta, and he was known in the community as Anathapindaka. Pindika, a very beautiful name, Anathapindika. This name rings so beautiful in the minds of the people that, a lot of people set up their charity organizations under the name of Anathapindika, because such a powerful image of a human being as to how one should be committed to the poor people in the world. So, when the Lord was at Rajagriha, when Lord was dwelling there, Anathapindika happened to visit the place on some private business of his own. He was stopping with his sister, who was married to the guild master of Rajagriha. So his brother-in-law was also a very rich man. He was a guild master. He was like manager of so many traders. When he arrived, he found a guild master preparing a meal for the lord and his monks on so great a scale that he thought that a wedding was in progress or that the king had been invited. So the next day, the Buddha was to visit his brother-in-law, and his brother-in-law was busy preparing a feast for the monks. And looking at that scene, Sudatta thought that, what is going on? Is there a marriage tomorrow? Or is the king visiting you tomorrow? And the story goes like this, very interesting story. So his brother-in-law tells him, no, 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 neither there is a marriage, nor the king is visiting. He says, the Buddha is coming. He says, the Buddha is coming, listening, hearing to the word Buddha. He asked, what you said? He said, Buddha. Again, he asked 3 times, and 3 times his brother-in-law utters the word Buddha. And at that moment, Sudatta is mesmerized by hearing the very word Buddha. And he just asked him, in which direction should I go to meet the Buddha? And this is night. And without caring for darkness, without fearing for his life, without fearing for anything, only uttering one word, Buddha, 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 Buddha. Sudatta leaves the scene, and the very night he goes to where the Buddha was. Such was, the emergence of faith in the Buddha, in Anathapindika, was so great that he couldn't wait for the night to end and meet the Buddha next morning. He wanted to see his Lord immediately. And uttering the word in the dark of the night, without fearing for his life, without fearing for any trouble, Sudatta goes where the Buddha was dwelling that very night. You see, in the verse number 4, on learning the truth, he became very eager to visit the Lord, and he set out in the very night to meet the Blessed One. The very night he left to meet the Blessed One. And the Blessed One saw at once the sterling quality of Anathapindika's heart and greeted him with words of comfort. And after taking his seat, Anathapindika expressed a desire to hear a discourse on some religious subject. He was already, in the awe of the Buddha. He was already, had confided his heart to the Buddha. He has already bestowed his life to the Buddha. And now he is standing before the Lord and he's asking him, please give me a discourse. Please tell me something on the religious subject. And I think this is very interesting because I have not come across the first discourse that the Buddha gave to Anathapindika, but I find it very interesting, in a sense. Baba Ambedkar has given a very brief summary of what has gone between the Blessed One, the Buddha, and Anathapindika. And I think this particular sermon, this very small gist of what the Buddha taught to Anathapindika that night is very interesting. And I'm going to throw some light on it and dwell on it, and we can all reflect on it together because I think it's very important. So in the verse number 6, the Blessed One responds to his wishes and raised a question. And now this is the question that has to be on our mind all the time. And this is the question that has been going on all our minds all the time, but sometimes we forget that question. And let's look at that question. What is that question? So the question goes like this: who is it that shapes our lives? What is it? Who is it that is shaping our life? And this is a very interesting question. When the Buddha asked the question like this, that who is it? What is it that shapes your life? And there are a lot of answers to the question, So the Buddha raises another question. Now the question, the prominent question is this, that who is it that shapes our lives? What is it that is shaping our lives? Who is responsible, in a word, for our lives? And I think this is very interesting sort of a conversation. The Buddha answers the question like this: is it Ishvara? He's asking whether Ishvara is shaping our lives, a personal creator. Is it Ishvara, a personal creator, who is shaping our lives? If Ishvara be the maker, if Ishvara is the maker of our life, all living things should have silently to submit to their maker's power. They would be like vessel formed by the potter's hand. If the world has been made by Ishvara, there should be no such thing as sorrow or calamity or sin. For both pure and impure deed must come from him. If not, there would be another cause besides him, and he would not be the self-existence one. Thus, you see, the thought of Ishvara is overthrown. You see, there is a lot of talk or speculation about, who is the shaper of our lives, who is the creator of our life. And the shortcut answer is the God. The God has created us. The God is shaping our lives. The God is controlling all the strings. We are just like the puppets, and our fate, our lives, are in the control of some Ishvara or a personal creator. So as if we bestow the responsibility of what is happening in our life to the third external agency. We say that we are not responsible for creating ourselves. So, this question of whether the Ishvara, the personal creator. Now, there are a lot of arguments in the Buddhist philosophy about how the creator cannot be there. Because if the creator has created something, that something has to be created out of something. So when that something is created out of something, the God cannot be the first cause of the creation. So that is how the argument goes. And therefore, it's very important that, this answer to the question is so important. Is it Ishvara, a personal creator? Is Ishvara, if Ishvara be the maker, all living things should have silently to submit to their maker's power. They would be like vessels formed by the potter's hand. So the God is like a potter who is trying to create the vessels, and we are the vessels. These arguments look very beautiful when we read it, but when we examine them, they hold no ground. We find no reason for a creator God to exist. Now, there are there is another answer to the question, who is it that shapes our lives? We see that there is something absolute. There is something immutable. There is something unchangeable that shapes our life. And this is how the Buddha argues. He says, again, it is said that the absolute cannot be a cause. Anything absolute cannot be cause, because anything absolute cannot exist. This is very interesting. If there is anything in the world which is permanent, it can never exist. Only impermanent things can exist. For example, our lives, if we don't grow, if we don't die, the life cannot continue. Imagine that, there is no death. The life cannot come into existence at all. The life comes into existence because there is a death. If the life was absolute, there would be no birth. So again, it is said that absolute cannot be a cause. All things around us come from a cause. That is what the Buddha says. All things around us, everything around us that we see has a cause. Nothing comes without any cause. As the plant comes from the seed, how can the absolute be the cause of all things alike? If it pervades them, then certainly it does not make them. So that is the second argument about, who is it that shapes our lives? The answer Ishvara is discounted. The answer absolute is discarded. And then again, it is said that the self is the maker. It is said that something, self is the creator of us, of the life. And the Buddha takes that argument like this and explains it very well. He says, but if self is the maker, why did he not make things pleasing? Because the cases of sorrow and joy are real and objective. How can they have been made by self? So self is not creator of what we can say, what shapes our life. People say that, the things are swayambhu. Swayambhu means arise out of themselves. They don't need any other cause, but the self is the cause of the life to arise. So that argument has also been, challenged by the Buddha, the argument of self. And then we see that the Buddha says, again, if you adopt the argument that there is no maker or fate such as it is, there is no causation. So if we say that there is no maker or there is no fate, then there is no causation. So we also tend to reject the theory of causation. What use would there be in shaping our lives and adjusting means to an end? So, it's a deterministic feeling that we just have to live our life just like that, because nothing is going to happen. But the Buddha says, no, it's not like this. And this is how the argument comes in the verse number 11. I think the verse number 11 is so important for all of us to understand. The whole world is under the law of causation, cause and effect. The whole world follows the law of cause and effect. And the causes that act are not unmental. Now see, this use of the word not unmental is double negative, means mental. The causes are based on the mind, and that is what the Buddha says in the very first verse of the Buddha of the Dhammapada, that Manopubangama Dhamma, the mind is the origin of all the things. All our experiences are mediated by the mind. If there is no mind, we cannot have concepts. If there is no mind, we cannot have experiences. If we have no mind, we cannot create the theories. There is no science. So what the Buddha is teaching to Sudatta, the Anathapindika, the great benefactor of the humanity, Anathapindika, we know that he has this benevolent heart, and he was ready to donate all his wealth for the poor and the needy. To him, the Buddha is teaching that what shapes our life. He rejects the idea of Ishvara, or the creator God. He says that the creator God doesn't shape our life. Nobody is holding the strings. Nobody is pulling the strings. Nobody is adjusting the strings from above. For us, there is, the Ishvara doesn't shape our life. And he has given the argument as to why such is not the case. Then he says that there is nothing absolute in the world. And that is what science talks about. There is nothing absolute in the world. Everything is relative. Everything, relational. The reality is relational. The reality is not absolute. And we can see that relationality all over the places. Our whole existence is dependent on the relationship of so many things, of so many people. So, the reality is relational. And that is what the quantum scientists call it. They don't talk about the absolute realities. They talk about the relational realities, contextual realities. And what shapes our life is not some self. So self is not the maker of our life, because if we analyze deeply within our experiences, we encounter that there is no self, there is no atta, there is no atma. And then it's not, chanceless, causeless chance. So the things doesn't also arise randomly. They are not random. There are causes and condition. Because of the causes and condition, things arise. Because of the causes and condition, we arise. And the Buddha teaches to Anathapindika, and it's summarized in the verse number 11 of this part, is the whole world is under the law of causation, and the causes that act are not unmental. Means the causes are mental. They are preceded, guided by mind. And we know that the Buddhism is all about mind. We need to understand the nature of our mind. We need to understand the methods to train our mind. And ultimately, we have seen that it's our mind that can guide us to freedom, that can lead us to the liberation, because mind is basically something that can be trained. Mind is something that can be transformed into good mind, the mind of the Buddha. So coming back to our discussion that goes on between Sudatta, whose another name is Anathapindika, and the Buddha refutes all these sources of the creation of what we can say, or that shapes our lives. Ishvara, of course, does not shape our life. The absolute does not shape our life. The self does not shape our life. The causeless chance, randomness does not shape our life. There is a law of causation, and our experiences, our lives are driven by our minds. So let's then surrender the heresies of worshipping Ishvara and praying to him. So if as much you pray to the Ishvara, nothing happens. That's what the Buddha says. Surrender the heresies. And this theistic religion, the Abrahamic religions like Judaism, Christianity, Islam, we see that they have a very strong concept of a creator God. In Hinduism, there is a concept of, also a creator God. So all over the places, we have seen this concept of the creator God, that, there is somebody hovering above us who has created this world, and who is shaping our lives, and who is controlling our lives and the fate of the world. That's one argument about the religion. But as far as Buddhism is concerned, the Buddha taught that, There is no external agency that is controlling us. There is our fates are not sealed. We have a potential. We can awaken ourselves. We can generate that light of wisdom within us. We can lead our lives to a better life. However wretched we are, however degraded we are, we all have a chance to rise above the situations that we are all fallen into, and really become the completely fully enlightened one, the awakened one, the one who sees as it is, the one who sees the reality of the world as it is, without bringing in notions and the thoughts and the philosophies in between. And that is what the Buddha is all about, seeing the world as it is. And the Buddha says that the mind is the fundamental reality. It is center of everything. What mind can do, mind can undo. If we act with the impure mind, the suffering follows. If we act with the pure mind, the happiness follows. So that's what the Buddha says. He says, let's then surrender the heresies of worshipping Ishvara and praying to him. Let's not lose ourselves in vain speculations of pointless subtleties. Because you see, all the time we are involved in these speculative thoughts without thinking about the existential question of the pain and suffering in the life. I have often told you the example of the Malukya Putta. The Buddha tells the Malukya Putta that on the crossroad, on the square, somebody is hit with an arrow, and the arrow is stuck in his eyes. And if we go there and we start speculating about the nature of the arrow, what is this arrow made up of, who has made this arrow, this is called a forensic inquiry. It's like the detective inquiry. So we are all loving these detective inquiries. But the Buddha says that, the first of all, what we should do is to pull out that arrow and heal the person. Isn't it? Without wasting, without having the speculative thoughts, what Baba Ambedkar called very nicely here. Let's not lose ourselves in vain speculations of profitless subtleties. Like in Hindi, we say, Bal ki khal nikalna. We are all the time, trying to talk about the useless things, argue about useless things without talking about the real suffering in the life. Suffering is so real and direct. There is a human suffering all over the places, the suffering due to the social structure, the suffering because of our bad behavior, and so on and so forth. So the Buddha says, let's not lose ourselves in vain speculations of profitless subtleties. Let's surrender self and all selfishness. All thinking about self based on the self and selfishness, we have to surrender. And as all things are fixed by causation, let's practice good so that good may result from our actions. Now see, this all things are fixed by causations. There are causes and conditions. So what we can do, we can create the causes and conditions. That's in our hand. And it is very beautifully summarized in the end. Let's practice good so that good may result from our actions. You see why we need to practice good? Because by practicing good, the good will result. And I think, and Anath Pindaka says, I see the truth of what the Blessed One had said, and I wish to open my whole mind, having listened to my words, let the Lord advise me what I should do. So you see, we are seeing that just listening, the hearing the name, the word Buddha, Anath Pindaka just, dashed out in the night to meet the Buddha. Having met the Buddha, he's so much taken over by the Buddha. He says that, I understand your Dhamma. I understand it, but I am a busy man. I am a treasurer to the king. I have so many business responsibilities. What should I do? Today, to him, the Buddha says that you don't have to leave your responsibilities. You can become my disciple, just by practicing the Noble Eightfold Path. So I'm going to skip and come to the verse number 17. This is what the Blessed One says. The bliss of a religious life is attainable by everyone who walks in the Noble Eightfold Path. So the fruits of the awakening are available to everyone without discrimination, who walks in the Noble Eightfold Path. So whoever walks on the Noble Eightfold Path will ultimately benefit the bliss of the religious life. He that cleaves to wealth had better cast it away, that allows his heart to be poisoned by it. If we get our hearts to be poisoned by the wealth, so much of wealth, then the suffering will come. The Buddha is not opposed to the wealth. He says that possessing riches, uses them rightly, will be a blessing unto his fellow beings. So the Buddha is not preaching or ennobling the poverty. If we can earn the money with the right means, maybe a lot of money with the right means, and we can open up that treasure for the welfare of others. The Buddha says that it's one of the greatest blessings. So verse number 21, I will read, and we will conclude for the today and open up for the discussion. 21. And whatever men do, whatever they remain in the world, as artisans, merchants, and officers of the king, are retired from the world and devote themselves to a life of religious meditation, let them put their whole heart into their task. So the most important thing is we have to put our whole heart into the task. Let them be diligent and energetic. And if they are like the lotus, which though it grows in the water, it remains untouched by the water. If they struggle in life without cherishing envy or hatred, if they live in the world, a life not of self, but a life of truth, then surely joy, peace, and bliss will dwell in their minds. So Buddha is also recommending us to live the life of truth and not the life of selfishness, but the life of truth. So let the truth be our guide. Let the truth guide us. Whatever, we have seen that there is no absolute, there is no Ishvara, there is no swa, there is no randomness. Only understanding the truth can guide us. Then surely joy, bliss, peace, and bliss will dwell in their minds. Anathapindaka perceived that this was the most excellent system of truth, simple and of wisdom born. Very beautiful. This sentence looks, very simple. But if you read this verse number 22, Anathapindika perceived that this was the most excellent system of truth. So what Anathapindika is calling the Buddha and his Buddha's Dhamma as the system of truth. And how is the system of truth? It's not complicated. Do good and good will follow. That's simple. And he says that system of truth, simple and of wisdom born. It's born out of the wisdom. It is not born out of any speculation. It is not born out of any random thought. It is not born out of any fanciful thinking, but it's born out of wisdom. This system of thought, what we call the Buddhism, is born out of the wisdom, is born out of the truth. And that's why, another quality of it is it's simple. It's not complicated. It's not a complicated ritualism that the religions ask us to do. Most of the religions, they teach us the complicated rituals, the very complicated things. But here is a summary of it, that the Baba Sahib Ambedkar has summarized the teachings of the Buddha, as we have seen above. Thus firmly settled in the true doctrine, he slowly bent in worship at the feet of the Blessed One and with closed hands made his request. So I think that's all for today, because these are the long sections of the part 3, and in the next we will be covering the conversion of King Prasannajit and conversion of Jivaka and Ratthapala. All of these conversions are very interesting. They are very rich people. One of them is a king, another is a big doctor, and another is one of the richest person in the town, Ratthapala. So with this, I will end my reflections on this part, and I will open it up for the discussion.
Jai Bhim, sir.
Jai Bhim, Samiksha.
Am I audible? Yeah.
Yes. Please go on.
Yeah. So in this section for this conversion of King Bimbisara, in this section, I wanted to reflect. It is written, just as a clean cloth free from black specks properly takes the dye, thus 11 myriads of those Magad Brahmins and householders with Bimbisara at their head while sitting there obtained the pure and spotless dye of the Dhamma.
Right.
Yeah. So, sir, here I wanted to reflect just as the clean cloth free from black specks takes the dye evenly, similarly, when our mind is free of any doubt, like in our mind there is no doubt, then only our mind can take the Dhamma evenly. So that's what Buddha did, like throughout his life. He didn't directly give discourse to any person. Like if anyone is doing wrong, then he used to tell that what the wrong act he's doing, what is the advantages and disadvantages. And once the person realized fully, when there is no doubt in that person, then that person was ready to take, the Dhamma fully, not without a doubt. So this is the first step, like with this step-by-step disclosure you can take. And the second one which I wanted to relate, sir, here is this doubt can be fully removed from mind through Samma Samadhi, because we have seen that there are 5 fetters, which also includes that laziness, doubts in our mind. So if through Samma Samadhi, if we are able to remove all these 5 fetters, and if we are able to train our mind to do only good, so these are the 2 situations, like what the example of Buddha, what I have given step by step, and this one, second one is Samma Samadhi. With these 2 steps, when there is no doubt in your mind, then only you can receive the Dhamma evenly.
Good.
Yeah. So this I wanted to reflect over, sir.
Good, Samiksha, good. I think I have spoken in the class about the 4 attitudes of when we study the Buddha and his Dhamma or the Buddha's teachings. There are like the examples given by the Buddha himself of the 4 pots. If we have pot, and if that pot is already filled up, so sometimes our minds are already filled up with a lot of theories, a lot of speculative thoughts, a lot of subtle speculations, and so on and so forth. When the pot is filled to the brim, nothing can enter it. So one of the attitudes of when we study Buddhism or anything in the world is to have the open mind. Okay, so I think this particular simile of a pot filled with water to its brim is the simile of a closed mind. So when we study the Dhamma, we have to have the open mind, or anything in the world. Whatever we study, we have to have the open mind. The second simile that the Buddha gives, that the pot is turned upside down. So when the pot is turned upside down, we cannot feel anything inside it. However hard we try to fill up the pot, we cannot fill the pot because the pot itself is turned upside down. So sometimes we are not open to the new things. Sometimes we are so closed that we don't want anything new to enter our lives or in our minds. So the Buddha says that, we have to have that intention to be actively open to understand something. I'm not just saying that it applies to the Buddhism, but everything that we study. That's third simile that the Buddha gives of the pot having the hole at the bottom. So if the pot having the hole at the bottom, how much water you are trying to fill in the pot, it will always leak. So it's a leaked pot. So most of the times our minds are like the leaked pots, whatever we try to fill in, it doesn't hold it. It just let it passes away. And the fourth way that the Buddha has given the example of a pot which is already poisoned from inside. So we are already colored by certain philosophies, certain ideologies, that even if we put water into that pot, that water converts into a poison or whatever color that there is inside the pot. So I think this simile of an open mind is very important. And I think that doubt, the Buddha says, is important also, because we have to have that attitude of questioning. The Buddha says that Buddha is not opposed to skepticism. Sometimes we have to settle with some teachings and start practicing it. That's true. That's very much heart of the Buddhism. But the Buddha says that don't close your mind. Sometimes good doubts can also be beneficial. Sometimes the mind that is skeptic, sometimes the mind that inquires, like the Buddha says, the mind of compares with the goldsmith, that the goldsmith will examine the gold with all rigorous test, whether that gold is pure or impure. Then only he will accept whether the gold is a real gold. Just like that, we have to examine everything, even Buddha's teachings. And if we don't find Buddha's teachings true to, this sort of an attitude, we can throw it up. Isn't it? I think no religion in the world, throws itself open to this challenge. Test it, experiment with it, find it out. So I think these doubts are important. but the doubts cannot be removed so easily. So we have to use this skeptical, inquisitive mind to question, to know more deeply everything that we encounter. And I think this simile of a cloth, of cloth is very interesting, because you cannot color a black cloth. So you need a stainless cloth, and then if you want to dye it, whatever dye color it has, it will take onto itself. Likewise, if this white cloth is a simile of an open mind. It's the mind of the Buddha itself, the mind that's open, the mind that's beginner's mind. That mind is not yet formed into any conclusion. That mind has not become orthodox mind. That mind has not become a closed block. It's a fluid mind. It's a mind that flows. It's a dynamic mind. It's not something static. So well said, Samiksha, and I think that's a good way to put it up. You see how the Buddha employs different metaphors and similes to explain us something which is very deep and complicated. I think that's the beauty of the Buddha's teachings. Any other things?
Doubt means there should be no doubt on Buddha and his Dhamma.
Exactly. Doubt has a parallel in faith. So if we have
strong faith.
Exactly. Saddha.
Shraddha.
Now, how does it? Yes, go on. Please go on.
No. What you are saying?
No, what I'm saying is that, when you practice Buddhism, you know that it works. And when you know that it works, you have a Shraddha. So it is not Shraddha which is based on speculative thoughts. It is a Shraddha based on your experiences. That if you practice 10 minutes of Anapanasati, it settles you down. If you do some compassionate activities, it has such a profound impact on our minds, on our hearts. And when we know that we have this faith in the Dhamma, that it works.
Yes.
Isn't it? So this faith is not a doubt. We don't doubt the Buddha's teachings because we have seen for ourselves that it works.
Yes.
Isn't it? Nobody tells us to believe it. It's this faith is not coming from outside. Somebody is not telling us to have faith. Like in the theistic religion, the God tells you to have faith in him or her. But here the faith comes by your experiences, it gets generated. And faith towards the Dhamma, that the Dhamma works.
Yes. And the example of white clean cloth, spotless cloth is given for the to compare our mind. Our mind should be clean and clear of the impurities. Impurities because of the thoughts. Since thousands years, our mind has become impure because of the teaching, Hinduism teaching and everything. So Baba Sahib has given this example. And so he says that unless you remove those thoughts, and you make your mind clean and clear, then only you will be able to understand the teaching of Buddha.
Yes. Good. Nicely said, Ty. Any other reflections or comments or criticism? Most welcome. Huh?
In point number 11.
Point number 11. Wait.
The whole world is under the law of causation. And the causation that act are non-unmental. You said they are guided by mind.
Mind, yeah.
Not the gold. Why this example has been given? For the gold of which the cup is made is gold throughout. How this example?
I think this is very deep. It's coming from the philosophical text that because everything that we perceive in the world, experience in the world, is through the mind. And according to the Buddha's philosophy, everything is mind-made.
Yeah.
So without mind, nothing can come into existence.
Yes.
Okay, so I think the mind is very, very important. So just like gold, the example that is given here of the gold, the gold. So if there is a cup made up of a gold, or a ring made up of a gold, or a lion made up of the gold, it's still a gold. Do you understand, Alka madam?
Yes.
It's a big philosophical argument that whatever you see in the world, ultimately it's generated by our mind. Okay,
Yes.
and anything, the good, bad, the sensual objects, the sounds also that we experience, there is no sound out there. The sound comes into existence because there is a mediation of the consciousness. Like what we see also is mediated by our eye consciousness, and we know through the science as to how it happens, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we know how the images are formed in our eyes. We know that how the sound are heard, and we know how our mind creates the integrated picture of the world.
Yeah, mind is everywhere,
Isn't it? So mind is everywhere, just like that. Even if the cup is made, the gold transforms into a cup, the gold transforms into a ring, the gold transforms into a lion roop, is still a gold. Just like that, if you examine all your experiences, ultimately we'll find that mind is behind it.
True.
So that is what is said. It's a very beautiful philosophical discussion. In Chinese philosophy also, there is a lot of written. Chinese Buddhist philosophy also a lot of written, and so on and so forth. So it's a philosophical statement. We can talk about it. But at this moment, we have to understand that everything is mind-made. All our experiences are mediated by mind, created by mind.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. Now, Dishant has a question. Is there a concept of heaven and hell in Buddhism? Now, hell is here and heaven is here. Dishant, we don't know whether the hell is out there or heaven is out there, but we know that we create the hell and heaven for ourselves. Right here on this earth. So let's be doubtful about the heaven and hell outside. But, there are two ways, Sugati and Dugati. These words prominently come in the Buddhist scriptures, and this area of what is called the rebirth and karma, we will be discussing it at length. Okay.
If we do good things and then it follows happiness, and then it is called, we work for the others, welfare of others, and then it is a heaven. And if we do bad evil deeds, then we go in. It is compared to hell in this life only.
Yes. Anybody? If not, then we will finish our class here today. And if you want, we can do our classes this week whenever it's possible, if you want it, or we will carry on with our regular Saturday, because we missed 2 classes, and we can compensate for them, or we will keep our regular track of Saturdays. We'll discuss in that group.
Hello,
Manoj bhai.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, sir.
I am Manoj Kate from Pune. Sir, today's session was nice and very informative.
Sir.
And I would like to make rather suggestion. It is my request, if it is possible, while giving the explanation, if you share PDF of Buddha and his Dhamma, that will be more beneficial, I thought.
Are you in our group, any of our groups?
Yes, sir, I am in group.
So I think Sharmishta is sharing the copy of the text.
No. While presentation, if you share the screen of the PDF,
I think that focuses too much attention on the screen, because we want it to be like a class. I think you can open up your devices or your book. I recommend from the very beginning that you have your copy of the Buddha and Dhamma and mark it, study it, because we know that what pages we are studying. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, okay, Manoj. Thank you. Okay, then we will finish our class today and see you next week.
So Sunday you are going to take?
I was planning to, but I don't